Let's get something straight before we start. I love this show. I love Tony. I love every single character in it, flaws and all. Normally, I rather talk about why Polly's hair is a personality trait than pick this family apart. But you asked me to put the psychology glasses on today. So that's what's happening. We're doing this like an actual case file, not a fan theory. You ever sit across from a guy who's laughing with his kids at the dinner table, talking about family like it's the only sacred thing left in this world, then find out he had someone he called brother killed that same week? Would you still call him complicated? Or is it time to admit he's a product of something rotten that started decades before he ever picked up a gun? That's Tony Soprano. For 6 seasons, we watched him, rooted for him, called him a legend. Today, we're not doing that. We're doing intake, symptoms, diagnosis. No surface level bullshit. How the panic attacks, the rage, the murders, all trace to one house. And I'm asking you now, before we even get started, have you ever excused someone's darkness because they were funny or protective in the right moments? Be honest. Drop it in the comments. We're going deep today. Anthony Soprano, boss of the DeMeo crew, big house, wife Carmela, kids Meadow and AJ. On paper, he's living the dream. Then the panic attacks hit him like a truck. Everybody remembers the ducks from the pilot. Cute family of birds lands in the pool. They fly off. Tony collapses, gasping in the yard. Most people watch that and think Big Softy loves his family that much. Wrong. Let's go back to when he's 11 years old. Kid's not supposed to be anywhere near this, but he watches through a doorway as his father and uncle hold a man named Satriali down, while Johnny Boy takes a cleaver to the guy's finger over a gambling debt. Tony doesn't bolt. He watches the whole thing happen. His father even tells him afterward, with something close to pride, that he's impressed the kid didn't flinch. That night, his mother's in the kitchen and cooking meat from the shakedown, a free score, and she's practically giddy, flirting hard with Johnny, turned on by the violence and the easy money it bought. Little Tony hits the floor, first panic attack and first faint. That smell wired straight into his nervous system for the rest of his life. Every time he's raiding the fridge for gabagool decades later, his body screaming about being 11 years old all over again. Let's meet the rest of the house, because Tony didn't get made in a vacuum. Johnny Boy Soprano, mob captain before his son ever wore the crown. Belt was his favorite parenting tool. Cheated on Livia openly for years. And the night she was in the hospital losing a pregnancy, he was with his mistress instead. Then came home and coached teenage Tony on the lie they tell about where he's been. Used his own daughter as cover at a mob meeting held at a carnival so nobody will clock the business happening. Tony grew up thinking his dad just favored Janice. Wrong again. She was a prop. Johnny taught violence is power and pride is completely normal. Taught his son that a cleaver settles a debt faster than any conversation ever could. And guess what? Johnny had panic attacks too. Handed that right down like a family watch that nobody asked to inherit. Olivia Soprano. She's the engine of this whole thing, honestly. This woman waved a fork in Long Tony's face and told him she could take his eye out with it. Told her kids more than once she'd smother them in their sleep, if she had to. Dr. Melfi eventually tells Tony flat out, people like your mother are incapable of real joy. When Tony finally puts her in a retirement home, she doesn't get sad about it. She starts a war, feeds information to Junior about Tony's movements, about the psychiatrist. quietly steers her own brother-in-law toward putting a hit on her own son. Cold manipulation, guilt as a weapon, everybody around her reduced to a tool for her own needs. Junior Soprano held Satriali down for the cleaver, later teams up happily with Livia to plot Tony's death. Envy so deep that betrayal barely registers as wrong to him. It just read as smart business. 3 adults raising 1 kid in that house. Then Tony gets made in the family and swears an actual oath. Crew comes before blood, ranked above wife and children in a ceremony with witnesses. His own hand against a burning holy card. Same toxic rules that he learned at the dinner table, now official. Sit with that for a second. And I said sit with that again. Watching your own YouTube videos, you could see how many things you say. What's your slangs? I'll try not to say sit with it. Or maybe it's my thing now. Sit with it. So, you grow up somewhere violence earns you respect and meet on the table, where your mother weaponizes love and your father uses his own kids as props. Then you join an organization that makes family mean something even more dangerous than the one you already had. How does a kid come out of that? Anything but broken. The second family. That's the real story here, and it's the part people skip. The mob wasn't new territory for Tony. It was the same system on a bigger stage with better suits. Watch how he handles Christopher. For years, Tony genuinely tries, forces an intervention with drugs get out of hand, sits through the ugly parts, ships him off to rehab, actually shows up for it in ways that look real. Looks like real care on paper. Works too for a while. Christopher comes back sober, sharper, actually building something, closer to becoming the man Tony always claimed he wanted him to be. But the second Chris starts succeeding as that, actually getting somewhere without needing Tony to hold his hand through it, Tony gets uneasy, undermines it without quite meaning to, or maybe meaning to more than he'd ever admit out loud. Same exact thing happened years earlier when his sister Janice made real progress in her own anger management, and Tony couldn't stand watching someone close to him actually heal because it highlighted every place he refused to. A system that rewards usefulness over love builds men who track exactly how useful everyone around them still is. Never mind protecting each other. Even Junior doesn't escape the wreckage he helped build. By the final season, he's slipping into dementia, a shell of the man who's once plotted against his own nephew. But was it real dementia or was he acting? What do you think? And when Tony visits him, Junior can't even place who he's talking to. He just rambles how he and Johnny used to run the neighborhood. Like it's a nice memory instead of the start of everything that went wrong. Tony leaves in tears. Ask yourself what he's actually crying for in that moment. The man in the chair or the childhood that man helped destroy. Now let's talk symptoms. Panic attacks were recurring, always circling to meat and the fear of a losing family. Dr. Melfi connects it herself. That specific food is wired straight to the night of the roast, and every collapse since is his body age 11 without asking permission first. Somatization is the clinical word for it. Simple idea underneath it. Your body throws the tantrum your mouth won't let you have. Tony doesn't sit down and cry about his childhood. Barely talks about it easily, even inside therapy. His nervous system does the talking instead, closing his throat, buckling his knees, landing him in an ER because the feelings had nowhere else left to go. It's not just Tony's body doing this either. AJ passes out from stress at football practice, in almost the exact same fashion. Tony admits to Melfi he once missed a major hijacking with his cousin because a fight with his mother triggered a panic attack. severe enough to black him out, cracked his head on the pavement, then lied about a mugging for years rather than saying what really happened. This family doesn't process fear. It faints through it and calls the wounds something else entirely. Food becomes ritual, compulsive, gabagool eaten alone at the fridge at midnight. A body self-soothing with the exact substance tied to the original trauma over and over again. An addiction wearing the disguise of a cultural work. Violence becomes automatic the second anyone gets close to Tony's actual feelings. Flip a table, break a nose, make the problem disappear. Learned straight from a father who taught him power works faster than a conversation. An affair pattern that keeps circling toward women who feel volatile and dangerous, echoing the woman who raised him. Yes, that means mommy issues. Gloria Trillo is the clearest case. Moody, punishing, impossible to please, and exactly the way Olivia was. And Melfi says it out loud in session. Tony's recreating the original wound instead of healing anywhere near it. Hypervigilance underneath almost every interaction he has. Watch how fast he scans a room, reads a tone shift, catches a slight before anyone else even registers it happened. A nervous system trained from childhood to detect danger before it fully arrives. Because in his house, it usually did. That kind of scanning looks like street smarts on the surface. Sharp instincts, a guy who never gets caught off guard. Underneath it is exhausting. It's a body that never learned it was allowed to relax. Running threat assessment on every single room it walks into for the rest of its life. Underneath all of it, it's a depression that never called by its real name. Not the version you'd recognize from a pamphlet in a waiting room. Irritability, risk-taking, overwork disguised as ambition. This is what depression looks like in men raised to never say the word out loud. And Tony, whether the writers meant it as a diagnosis or not, became one of the most accurate portraits of male depression television has ever produced. The cycle doesn't stop with him either. By the final season, AJ, the son Tony always swore would never end up like him, is buried under depression severe enough that he attempts to take his own life in the family pool. He survives, gets hospitalized, and in the family therapy session names the exact same resentment Tony carried his whole life. Humiliation, a grandmother who made a kid feel like nothing. Nobody ever watching. Carmela calls it a family predisposition passed down like eye color. Tony's response is to call his own son a coward for trying. That single reaction tells you exactly how far this pattern's traveled with nobody stepping in to break it. Let's diagnose the properly, like you're sitting across from me and we're actually walking through the file together. Because you can't diagnose Tony without diagnosing the room he grew up in first. Johnny Boy fits a clean narcissistic pattern. Infidelity he treated as owed to him. Kids repurposed as tools, cover stories, an audience for violence he clearly wanted witnessed. Barely any concern for how it landed on the people he's supposed to love him unconditionally. Olivia resists one tiny label, and the show built her that way on purpose. Melfi's first read leads borderline personality disorder. The unstable relationship, the volatility, the near total inability to see anyone as more than an extension of her own needs. Melfi actually settled on narcissistic personality disorder instead. Some clinicians who studied this character go further and argue she edges into genuine psychopathy, given how little remorse she shows while actively working to get her own son killed. Whichever label lands hardest, the effect on Tony is the same. An attachment style where love and danger got wired into the exact same circuit before he could talk. Junior brings a quieter strain of damage, envy weaponized into strategy, loyalty treated as currency to spend against evaluate worth holding. Now, Tony, panic disorder with somatic symptoms, documented across the entire run, major depressive episodes hidden behind male coded symptoms instead of the textbook ones, antisocial personality disorder traits, the manipulation, the reflexive turn to violence, remorse that surfaces for about 90 seconds before it gets buried under the next task. Given who raised him, there is a strong current of narcissistic personality disorder running through him too. Grandiosity paired with a genuinely fragile ego that needs constant proof that he's respected and feared in equal measure. Even Melfi eventually stops pretending otherwise. People who've studied this character closely point out that she privately recognizes Tony as something close to an irredeemable sociopath as early as season 2 and keeps treating him anyway for years, right up until the second to last episode of the whole series, when she cuts him off with no real closure session at all. Maybe that's her finally waking up to the fact that 6 or 7 years of therapy never made Tony a better man, only a sharper one, better at reading people and managing his own panic well enough to keep functioning as exactly what he already was. Does therapy sometimes sharpen the knife instead of dulling it? We, as psychologists and who study criminal behavior, have actually raised this question about the show directly. Whether insight without accountability just produces a more articulate version of the same problem. If a trained psychiatrist can get pulled into excusing someone for years because he's compelling and funny and in real pain some of the times, ask yourself how much easier that trap is for other people, sitting on a couch with no clinical training at all. Here's what actually earns him dread scale material. And it's not the checklist. A true psychopath doesn't get panic attacks from his own conscience. Tony does. Every time. He feels the guilt land full weight and chooses the violence directly afterwards anyway. Watch the pattern in action. Gloria threatens to tell his wife and daughter about the affair once Tony ends it for good. He pins her down and chokes her, stops the second she starts telling him to finish it. Like the threat of dying is the only thing that ever made her feel alive. That relationship was always Livia's shape wearing different clothes. The volatility, the guilt trips, the way affection and punishment kept trading places without warning. And Tony walked straight back into it anyway because it felt familiar. And familiar felt like home, even when home was the exact thing that broke him. Months later, she takes her own life. Tony spends the next stretch of episode doing small acts of generosity, quietly settling debts, signing paperwork he refused Carmela for years. Like good deeds can pay off the debt his conscience wouldn't drop. Lasts about as long as guilt usually lasts on him, a few episodes. Then he's back to baseline. Big Pussy, one of his oldest friends, turns out to be an informant. Tony finds out and takes part in killing him personally, which was a sad episode because I really liked Pussy. That sounded so weird. Adriana gets cornered by the feds over a minor drug charge and starts cooperating just enough to survive. She tells Christopher and he finds out and tells Tony instead of protecting her. Tony calls Adriana himself, and you remember their affair behind Christopher's back, right? So anyways, he lies to her face about Christopher being hospitalized, sends her off with Silvio, who drives her into the woods and shoots her while she's crawling away, begging. Then Christopher. Was it season 6? He's relapsed again, high behind the wheel with Tony beside him, and the car goes off the road. Tony walks away with minor injuries. Christopher's bleeding out, gasping. Tony looks at him for a long moment and pinches his nephew's nose shut, holds it until he stops breathing, then tells everyone the crash killed him. The excuse he gives himself centers on the crushed baby seat in the back. Christopher's own daughter could have died in it. So in his head, this reads as protection instead of murder. People who follow the storyline for years point out the obvious hole in that logic. Tony wanted Christopher gone long before that crash. The accident didn't create the motive. It just handed him somewhere to hide it. Afterwards, he flies to Vegas, does peyote with Christopher's own mistress, watches the sun come up over Red Rock Canyon, and screams, "I get it," like he's just had a spiritual breakthrough instead of committed a killing. Now hold that against the fork, against years of threats about smothering. Season 1, Tony learns his own mother conspired to have him killed. When she has a stroke shortly after, he stands over her hospital bed, seriously weighing whether to finish the job with a pillow. He doesn't that time. Years later, with Christopher in the exact same posture of a man deciding someone close to him is a liability, he does. Same method his mother threatened her own kids with when he was small. The lesson she taught through fear becomes the lesson he carries out by hand, decades later, on someone he actually loved. 3 close relationships, 3 deaths, one identical instinct running through all of them. He dismantled his own found family with his own hands the moment each one threatened him, the exact same way his blood family dismantled him first. One more person worth putting under the light until we close this out. Because she's the closest thing this show has to a mirror pointed straight at us. Carmela knows, in broad strokes, exactly what her husband does for a living, and has for the entire marriage. A priest counsels her at one point to stay for the sake of stability and the kids, which quietly lets her off the hook for the guilt she keeps circling back to, on her own. She takes the money, builds a spec house with a chunk of it, sends Meadow to elite college on the back of it, and spends years constructing an elaborate internal system for not looking directly at where any of it came from. Carmela's sharp self-aware enough to name her own denial out loud in more than one therapy session of her own. This is a choice she renews daily. Keep loving the version of Tony that's charming and protective, while refusing to add up with the rest of him costs everyone else. Millions of us made the same choice every week for years, and most of us never had to actually live inside the marriage to do it. That's worth sitting with for a second, because it's easy to judge Carmela from a couch with snacks and no stakes. Harder to admit you were doing a version of the exact same math every single night. Weigh how much you liked a guy against how much damage he was doing, and landing on liking him anyway. And let me tell you, this was normal for mob families. They've been raised with it. And I'm just talking about it through a psychological lens. No judging about how they live. The dread scale. The series, of course, is 10 out of 10. But today, 8 out of 10. And here's exactly why it stops short of the top. Tony Soprano isn't dread because he reads as inhuman. He's dread because he's completely recognizable, funny at exactly the right moments, fiercely protective of his kids in ways that genuinely lands on screen. And you keep liking him anyway, straight through all of the seasons. He panics in a therapist's office like a real frightened person. And something in you softens when it has to be pulling back hard. A real monster would be easy to rate a 10. You clock it, keep your distance, sleep fine. Tony doesn't let you off that easy, which is exactly the point. That's the actual horror underneath all of this prestige television. Not the murders themselves, brutal as they are, the exact moment you catch yourself thinking, I understand why he did that, about a man who smothered his own nephew with his bare hands. So answer this honestly. Have you ever excused someone's cruelty because they were also charming, protective at exactly the right moment, funny in exactly the way that made the rest easier to ignore? Call their volatility passion because admitting you were actually scared of them felt like the bigger betrayal? Tony Soprano was built by a father who taught violence with a cleaver, a mother who taught love with a thread, and an uncle who taught betrayal as just another line item in a family ledger. 3 teachers, 1 curriculum, and he graduated at the top of the class. His own son almost paid for that inheritance with his life. And this show never pretends the pattern ends with Tony, only that nobody around him was ever willing to be the one who broke it. None of this is an excuse, so don't mistake it for one. Understanding where a monster came from doesn't shrink what he did to the people who trusted him. It just means that our villain had a blueprint, and somebody handed it to him before he was old enough to refuse it. So tell me, who's the Tony Soprano in your life? And be honest with yourself. Are you still the one making excuses for them? Thank you for being here. If horror feels like home, join the Dominion.